Okay, good afternoon everyone and welcome to this meeting of the Kinross-shire Local Committee. My name is Councillor Willie Robertson. I'll be chairing it this afternoon. I'm pleased to welcome the new representatives that have been elected through the community councils. I hope you enjoy your time with the Kinross-shire Local Committee and feel it's worthwhile. And I'd also like to welcome David Cairns, who's going to be doing a presentation to us as part of our reports. Have we any apologies?
Yes, convener, we have an apology from Councillor Freshwater. So I'm just going to run through the attendance. So if you could please confirm you're present when I call out your name. So convener, we've heard from yourself, Councillor Cuthbert.
Present.
And Councillor Waters.
Present.
And then community council members, do we have Sarah Bruce-Jones?
Present.
Hannah Phillips? Andy Miller? Fran Principe Gillespie?
Present.
Thank you. Malcolm Thompson?
Present.
And Douglas Fraser?
Here.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kirsten. Right, are there any declarations of interest? Okay, if not, can we move on to item 3, which is the minute of a previous meeting for approval. Everyone quite happy with the minute? Thank you. The minutes are approved, and we'll go on to matters arising now. As Mr. Butterworth has said, unfortunately, Darryl McEwen is not with us this afternoon because of, unfortunately, suffering from COVID, which is very unfortunate. But if there's any matters that anyone wishes to raise, and Sarah, I'm aware that there was quite a bit of a discussion at Fossaway about the issues with Cairnbow. So I'll maybe ask you if you want to comment first, and then I'll lead on after that. And if you want to know how to take part in the discussions, if you type a little C in the message box in the bottom right hand corner and click the arrow, your name will come up and I'll know that you're wanting to chat. Otherwise, you'll have to wave, and I can't always see everybody in front of me, so it's better to use the chat function if you can. Is anybody not sure how the chat function works? Okay, right. Do you want to make a comment, Sarah?
Yes, please. I would like to. As Willie alluded to, at our last meeting of the Fossaway and District Community Council, which was held at Cairnbow, we had a very heated debate with residents from Cairnbow in particular to do with road safety issues. They were extremely disappointed to the point of, I think we would have been needing hard hats at some points, that none of the, and in particular the change from 40 to 30 speed limit going through Cairnbow still hadn't been actioned. They wanted answers as to why it was, what was happening, what the situation was. We explained that we'd received the list from Perth and Kinross Council with the all the temporary traffic orders that were in place, and that we were going to be looking at prioritising ones for each of the community councils. As a community council ourselves, we've gone through that list, separated out the Fossaway ones, and Councillor Marchant has put together a sort of Fossaway based. We haven't shared that. I think Nicola might have shared it with the elected councillors. We have written to the Chief Executive of Perth and Kinross Council about the issues with road safety and the lack of action on particular issues in Cairnbow, which we haven't had a response to yet. We don't think we're in a position to be able to say categorically which of the issues that relation to Fossaway, how we prioritise them. There are some issues. There were some issues on that list that were out of date. They've already been actioned. So we couldn't work out why they were on the list. There were others that have been talked about for 5 years that were showing as still to be actioned. For example, the crossroads at Drum, the road realignment at Crook of Devon. So we were, we just wanted to get some clarity on, and maybe from the other community councils, as to what priorities they were setting for all those traffic orders that were in place. From our point of view, the number one priority for us is to get that speed limit in Carnbow down to 30 and the signs up and it actioned, and at least to be able to go back to the Carnbow residents and say that there's a timeline. We appreciate resources are limited, but the feeling amongst the residents of Carnbow is that someone's going to get killed on that road. And will that be the action that has to happen before something happens? Okay,
thanks, Sarah. I appreciate, and I think my fellow ward councillors appreciate how frustrating this is for you. Now, Mark Butterworth, you're actually taking a note of this week. Will you be able to come back and the letter that's gone to the Chief Executive from Fosterby Community Council will actually come to you, I presume. Will you be able to do something about it and give them a firm idea of when the change in speed limits will be introduced?
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Robertson. As I said earlier, I'm happy to take away any specific questions or points of clarity or concerns and provide a written response to members of the committee. I think I would just say generally, I understand people's frustrations, and I hear similar frustrations every single day, and I do hear similar comments around things like, does an accident need to happen before the council will do something? And I would just say that no one issue is unimportant. I absolutely get that. The issue that you're talking about in the area you're talking about, I'm not saying for a minute is not important. It's not something that we need to address. I think sometimes it's difficult to appreciate. Daryl's not here today and nobody else is available because the size of the team that deals with something like this is just so small. And we have a road safety database which contains every scheme that people have contacted us about in terms of concerns. And that database is up to 950 schemes now. So that's 950 letters or emails or meetings where people have said, this needs to happen or something really bad's going to happen. So I'm not by any means saying that this is not an important issue. I'm just trying to hopefully try to explain there is a lot of demand and only a very small team, and the guys are doing the best they can to get to these as quickly as possible. But as I said, I will get a note back on this particular issue and we'll try to put some timescales around that. Just thank you for your patience, but I can absolutely appreciate why people are frustrated and can be quite angry about these things.
I think most of the community, I think everyone understands that the road safety team are under a lot of pressure, and that this is the reason why they've been asked to prioritise the things that they think are urgent. So hopefully that will help to bring it forward. Dave Cuthbert, Councillor Cuthbert would like to ask a question.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. Basically, I've suggested a couple of times that we look at the possibility of outsourcing some of this work. My understanding is that the issue we've got with delivering the road safety is because you've had a number of staff who've left recently. And I'm just wondering if anybody was actually looking at something like an outsourcing of some of the things, maybe the TTROs or something like that.
Yes, thanks, Councillor Cuthbert. Yeah, we are looking at that. I think sometimes the difficulty with that is it's quite difficult, believe it or not, even to get consultants, never mind grow the size of the team or get people on a temporary basis to focus on an individual project or series of projects. And I think also sometimes the most important thing is having the local knowledge of the particular area, the particular road. And again, that doesn't necessarily come buying someone in externally, but it is certainly something that we are looking at, because as I think I've said in the past, we have actually got physical cash. It's not a lot of physical cash, but we have got money for some of these schemes. It's just really the size of the team and the number of people. I think at one point the team's only about 6 or 7 in size, and I think at one point we had 3 or 4 vacancies. You know, people are moving on it very quickly these days across all local authorities. It's difficult to recruit. It's an employees market, if you like. So actually retaining staff and recruiting staff is very difficult right across all local authorities, and particularly in the road network team. But we are looking at that, absolutely.
Right. Are you happy with that response, Dave?
Yeah, I think so. The only thing I would say is it may be worth community councils looking to see if there's anybody local that does that sort of work. I don't know if there is anybody, I have no idea, but maybe we can feed that back to Mark if there is somebody local that can do that.
Okay, thank you. Sarah, you'd like to come back in again?
I would, yes, thank you. The letter that went out from Fossaway went to Thomas Glenn and went to Mark Butterworth, and we haven't had a response to it yet. With regard to Carnbow, I've actually had 4 residents in Carnbow who said if you can give them the street signs, they'll put them up, because it's literally a case of, as far as they're concerned, changing the number on the post. I don't know how that fits in there, but this is where they want to know is it that there is no contractor to do the work, or is it still legal and it's still got to go to consultation? I think for a lot of residents, and I think probably speaking for all the community councils, the residents just want us to tell them an answer. If it's cash, just tell us and we can give that back, as opposed to 6, 8, 9 months of, well, we're not quite sure what the reason is. It could be this, it could be that. When it comes to money, as far as I understand, a lot of these things have already been budgeted. There's been budget allocated already and ring fenced. For example, the work on the 977, there was all the 977 mitigation measures that we were assured the money was there, it was ring fenced, and it would have to go that way. So it's not then a financial issue, it must be a manpower issue. But tell us that, and if we can give that back, we can respond to it. I'd also just like to, can I, okay, sorry, yeah. Willie. Yeah.
Well, I'm just going to say it's not a financial problem. It's as Mr. Butterworth says, it's totally a manpower problem. There's just not the staff. The road safety team just don't appear to have the staff to carry out all the even the priority things just now. But carry on, your another point to make.
The other thing I was saying is after an internal meeting we've had was whether to talk to the other community councils as to find out, are we all going to use the same matrix for deciding on the priorities within our community councils? Because each of the community councils will know themselves which of those, I think for our own was it 14, sorry, 22 different, 24. We know what our priorities are, but if we all come up with our top 3, and then that's replicated across the whole of Perth and Kinross, we're still back at square one. We've got a list of priorities that is longer than resources, manpower resources there to do it.
My understanding, speaking to Mr. McDonnell McEwen, is that if he knows which each of the 3 priorities are for each of the community councils, he will do his utmost to try and get those done as quickly as possible and not spend time on things that are in the list that aren't really a priority for the community councils in whose area these stand. But perhaps Mark Butterworth, would you want to comment on that?
Yeah, I think really you've fit the nail on the head there, haven't you? You know, just by saying each community council with 3 priorities, the numbers really sort of stack up. I think what we're trying to do is we're trying to just get those things which are most important, and we're going to try to get those things done first. And you know, as I'm sure Darryl said, we've got individual programs. We've got individual programs for, I think we've got about 58 TTROs, which we're moving over to making them permanent. We've got, we're as again, Darryl told you, we've got a number of vehicle activated signs, which we're going to introduce. And we were hoping to do that pre-Christmas. We've had issues with the procurement process, so that's going to be post-Christmas now. It's probably going to be around March, April, May time where we get those VAS signs in. But as Councillor Robertson said, and I said earlier, it's not necessary at the moment cash, because the council has allocated budget motion money towards road safety schemes. Unfortunately, generally the nature of that money is one-off money for 12 months, and when we try to employ somebody for a 12-month period, it's very, very difficult. So I think also one of the issues that we face is some of the money that we get, grant money, needs to be spent in the year, where council money can be spent over a number of years. So also we focus around not losing the grant money. So it's quite a complex situation, but effectively it just revolves around the fact that we struggle with the size of the team and to get things done. But if we can get those priorities from you, we will do our utmost to focus on them. And if it makes sense, as Councillor Cuthbert has said, to get external resources in, we'll do that as well. But we are trying our best to get through through something which is very, very demanding, and it's important to everyone.
Okay, thanks very much indeed. And if I can make a special request, not to use abbreviations. Not everyone knows what PTROs are, so it's always helpful when we're to try and not use these at all possible. Fran from Cleason Blair Adam Community Council, you've got a question.
Yes, thank you, Willie. The expanding on what Sarah was asking, I was wondering if there is essentially a simple rule of thumb that the council follows. I appreciate that there never is a rule of thumb, but where, for example, at what point does a group of housing become a settlement? Is there a number of houses within a certain density that would then mandate a certain speed restriction? Is there something that we as community councillors can get a look at, where we know what the council will be looking at, so that if for example, we've had an application for a number of houses to go into a certain area near Cleash, and we're hoping that that might actually trigger some form of speed restrictions to be put in place. I appreciate Carnboy is already a large settlement, so that's obviously not a question there, but I'm just wondering if there was something that would help us all to be able to say, when you breach this certain level, then this will take place.
Okay, thank you. Mark, would you like to respond to that?
Yeah, I'm not aware of anything like that. Maybe from a planning perspective, in planning guides there may be something, but generally it's about road usage and road conditions and the sort of the environmental conditions. So I don't think there is any rule of thumb. We have a criteria which we apply when we are assessing priorities. So if you come forward with a particular request, we will look at that and we will do an assessment based on a priority, sort of a criteria list, which we have in terms of using that to rank the schemes in terms of importance, and that does take into account things like accidents and data that we get from the various emergency services and various other things. So we have a criteria, but I don't think there is any hard and fast rules which we would apply which relate to the size of a population, anything like that. It's more around the road conditions and the information we have about any road or part of that road. Okay,
thank you. Are you happy with that, Fran?
That's great. No, that I was being optimistic, so
No.
but thank you.
Right, I see no other questions on my chat. So if that's the case, I'm just going to move on to an update on the Blair and Gone primary school situation. Is everybody happy with that? And I see Lee is with us, Lee Haxton. Do you want to give us, Lee, are you giving us an update on this?
Yes, give me a brief verbal update if that's okay. Two main things. The Development Trust was given access to the former school buildings on the 19th of November to have a bit of a tidy up and a bit of a community get together, which appears to have gone relatively well. They have also been in receipt of some unneeded or surplus to requirement chairs from the hall at Cricket Devon, so they have those to use when the time comes. In terms of the actual process of the asset transfer, they have submitted their request to be registered as a charity to Oscar, and it normally takes around 3 months. So that was submitted in October, so probably early next year they will have the legal status that they require in order to submit a community asset transfer to us. If you recall, back at the first meeting of the committee in January of this year, members agreed to review this position more formally after 12 months. So we would probably be looking to do that at the first meeting of 2023, and by then I would hope to be able to give an estimated timescale for when the newly established charity will be in a position to submit their formal request.
Right, thanks so much indeed. Any comments or questions on that? Okay, thanks so much indeed, Lee. Right, I'm going to hand over to Councillor Cuthbert for paper 5. Do you want to take it, Dave?
Thank you, convener. Yeah, this is to do with the proposals of the Boundary Commission for Scotland. It's on pages 9 and 10, I think, of the papers that were sent out. What was sent out is effectively a motion that was put before the council. The council approved the motion, and the purpose of putting this here is really to see whether the Kinross-shire Local Committee feel that we should write in as a committee of the council to express our concerns at what's being proposed. In essence, what's happening is that in the proposals, Scotland Well Ochmuir Bridge has been hived off to a different MP area. It's going towards Fife rather than Perth and Kinross. My own feeling is that we should try and keep Kinross-shire together as much as possible, and therefore we should consider writing in and saying that we object to the proposal as it stands. I don't know if anyone's got any questions or comments on that, or whether we feel that's something we should be pursuing. Councillor Waters.
Yeah, I think you know, Kinross in any election, or Kinross-shire in any election, has never ever been split up between different constituencies, with the area around Scotland Well and Ochmuir Bridge and Vindity getting split off, where there's 472 members of the electorate that are getting split off to make up the shortfall in numbers for Glenrothes. There's the Glenrothes constituency, proposed constituency, loops around south of Benarty Hill and covers Kelty. You know, the Boundary Commission have more than enough the ability in the Dunfermline kind of outside that area to take some houses for there and add it into the Glenrothes one. Clearly exists without breaking the very strict quota rules that are in place. So I would encourage anybody, groups of people, individuals, to take part in the consultation, which I believe ends on the 5th of December. To actually respond to this and just ensuring that Kinross keeps its historical integrity intact, and we whatever constituency we're in, we're all in it together, and we're all represented within within that. The real issue over this is the very strict criteria. Boundary Commission Scotland had what within their criteria, general criteria, the aim to protect, geographical areas, community boundaries, wards, council areas, and that was a clear aim. It's changed, it's changed in this one, where they've added that we'll try and protect this where it fits, and then kind of reference the strict quota rules, and that is the real problem. But it is incumbent on all of us, I think, to respond. And I certainly would, if as a committee, as a council, the response is in there with clear guidelines or clear alternatives that the Boundary Commission can do even within the rules. But I think it would be appropriate for us as individuals and as a committee to respond if people are minded to do so. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Waters. Councillor Robertson, you want to say something?
Yes, thanks. I think it'd be quite useful if we could actually hear from the Community Council representatives with us this afternoon to see what their thoughts on this, and if they think it's important that we as a committee respond to this consultation.
Malcolm, are you?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Hi. Yeah, as Milnathort Community Council, absolutely. To be honest, I thought you might have replied already. As 100% should be fought against. I don't know if there's if Portmoak Community Council are on at the meeting tonight. Obviously, they're the chief group being affected.
I don't see them here. If they are, can they make themselves known? No, I don't see anything. How about Sarah? How about Fossaway? What's your position?
Thank you, Councillor. We are behind a response coming to that. I don't think that Kinross and Kinross-shire should be broken up. We would support fully the maintaining the boundaries where they are, not splitting off Scotland Well to Fife.
Okay, thank you for that.
I would agree with Willie. I thought this is already at the next stage already. I hadn't realised that the council hadn't already hadn't already responded that that's what we wanted to keep.
I think, to be clear, the council has responded through the council committee, but this is more about Kinross-shire putting forward our position as a local committee. So I think so far everyone's agreed. How about Fran? What's Cletion?
Yeah, no, I'm completely in agreement. I think it's very important historically that we try and keep our boundaries where they are. So I'm in agreement with everyone, with everything that's been said so far. So yes.
Okay, I'll just finalise with Douglas from Glenfarg. And do you agree with what's being said?
Bear with me, I'm just getting myself sorted. Yeah, I totally agree. We thought in Glenfarg we were one of the ones that were going to be hived off, and we were quite alarmed at that prospect. I believe that the psyche in Fife would be different to that of Perth and Kinross Council, so I think we should retain our rural population, as we're all singing from the same hymn sheet here.
Okay, that's great. Thank you for that. I've got a point of clarification from the head of legal, Lisa Simpson, if you want to give your point.
Thank you, convener. It was just to clarify that there was obviously an initial consultation which was responded to by the council in great depth. This was then considered by the Boundary Commission and a second iteration came out, and this is now the council's response to the second iteration, and this is what we're then asking whether or not this committee or individual community councils etc. would wish to follow that and submit their own objections along these lines. So there was a very detailed response to the first. This is the boundary. This is our second response now back to the Boundary Commission's response to the initial consultation exercise. So this is phase 2, just to make that clear for people on
For
the
clarification, it's perfectly within the Kinross-shire Local Committee's powers, presumably, to write on behalf of the committee to the. Correct?
Yeah, that isn't an issue, and indeed anybody can. Right, this is still part of the consultation exercise, so anyone who has a view can express that view to the Boundary Commission, and you have the detail of the response that is going in on behalf of the council, and that can either be replicated or amended or adapted as people see fit and how they want to respond.
Thank you for that. So in essence, everybody agrees we should write. It's legal to do so, so perhaps we can ask the convener to write on behalf of the committee to the Boundary Commission expressing our position. Are we all happy with that? Okay, I'll hand back to Councillor Robertson for the next item.
Thanks very much indeed. The next item is really for information. David Cairns approached me some time ago with an idea to install a district heating system for Lochleven, using Lochleven as a heat source, which I thought was extremely exciting. And him and his small committee, Catch, have been working to try and firm that up. And David's going to give you a small presentation on how they've got along so far. David, I'll hand over to you.
Hello, can you hear me? I should, I think, be able to share my screen, which might just help. Am I allowed to share a screen?
David, I think we already have the presentation set up for you, and my colleagues can move through the slides when you're ready.
Okay, no problem. That's super.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. The group called Catch has really come into existence. I stimulated it a year ago by a rather depressing COP26, which has obviously just recently again been brought back to memory at COP27. We're very conscious of the challenge of getting government level action to make a big enough difference to resolve our climate challenges. At the other end of the spectrum, I've spent a lot of this past year trying to take my own house and move forward individually with what I can do to improve our house efficiency and our carbon footprint. But it's very obvious that as a community, we have other opportunities to work together to move the carbon needle. There was a report by Green Spaces for the Scottish Government that looked at all the water sources in Scotland, looking at the energy potential that they had, and the Lochleven was mentioned in there as being of high potential. So some of us started looking to ask the question, bearing that potential in mind, what would it actually take to be able to leverage heat from the loch into the housing to warm residents, warm our public buildings, leveraging the renewable energy source and significantly reducing the typical gas profile that we have for heating our houses. So since there was a very good meeting at the Climate Cafe in Milnathort, where one of the ex-councillors, Joe Jacopazzi, presented a discussion on his house and the glorious things that he's been able to do. Having the alignment of appropriate technologies, appropriate context of your house, the capital to do it, and the motivation to make possible changes. It's like having the stars aligned. It's really difficult to pull those all together. District heating might provide an opportunity to make a bigger, more useful change, but also to deal with that motivation question of getting people lined up to do it. Could we go on to the next slide? I'm assuming that you've been able to see these slides in the papers, and also I wrote a little paper with just more background information. So I wasn't going to go into too much detail in this discussion, but I'm very interested in questions and what support you might be able to give. We've been thinking, this is perhaps an unusual picture, an angst balance. What is it that could stop the project coming to fruition? What is it that we're hoping to achieve on the right hand side? The balance between those. Risks are a problem if you can't manage them, if you can't mitigate them so they don't impact. And there's a long list of things that could get in the way. We've been working to describe what they are. We've been working to understand what options there might be in there, what solutions might be available. A number of these, it really splits in two parts. There's a distribution network, if we're thinking about a district heating system, how to get heat delivered to the individual houses and premises. And then there's a heat source side of it, which is a little mixed in the slide. But on the distribution side, we've been looking at what the current heat demand is for the properties through Kinross and Milnathort, and looking at what type of network, what level of pipe work would be required to deliver heat directly to houses. There's a real cost benefit that has been demonstrated elsewhere, particularly on the continent, where district heating systems are much more prevalent. They've demonstrated that economies of scale by having large collective plant generating the heat in the first place enables cost savings by distributing that without having the individual infrastructure in-house of a boiler, or we are all under pressure to be thinking about how we move to air source heat pumps or ground source heat pumps. Going for a district heating system potentially means you can take a lot of that out of the house and just use the heat delivered from the distribution network. Insulation is very important there. It's always important when trying to reduce carbon footprint, and there's a lot that can be done to improve the nature of the housing stock in the towns. If we're going to look towards leveraging heat from the loch, in particular, though there are other renewable sources available which need to be part of the mix, the loch, of course, as a nature reserve, has very strict constraints on how that can be developed. Anything going near the loch, protecting the loch, has to be the #1 requirement from a nature point of view. Though there are also obviously the ownership questions and access questions to find solutions for. If we can solve those problems, if we can find a good way through it, then there is potential to deliver good low-cost heating for residents and businesses. That is very low carbon to produce. That's hugely important at the moment, where we're all struggling with cost of living crisis and energy costs at the moment. But in order to get people to shift to a greener set of solutions, then working together with a collective scheme may well help provide the motivation required to make that shift. People moving their house forward individually, it's going to be a very long journey. That's immediately obvious. Could we go to the next slide, please? This is quite a detailed picture, but it was interesting enough to put in a little presentation to stimulate your thinking. Just looking street by street at what the demand for the average property in that street is. I've now lived in Kinross getting on for 30 years, so I know all these streets. It's very interesting as you wander around looking at the different build standards, the different ages of the property. There's fundamental challenges in some areas about the nature of the way they were constructed, to do with how they can be retrofitted and improved to make them more energy efficient and support going to greener sources. The build standard's one thing, but there's also quite clearly socioeconomic differences and indeed different patterns of behaviour. I'm thinking of one street in particular where it's largely elderly people who live there who are needing more heat in their property. It's a real struggle for them just to turn it down. The two axes on this graph along the bottom, how much heat is used per year in each individual house, and then going upwards, looking at the heat density, how much pipe work do you need to deliver that heat? For comparison, there's a very good study, which I put the reference to in the paper, that looks at a comparison with what's happening in a suburb of Copenhagen and also a suburb of London, where in London, the average heat requirement is about 5.5 megawatt hours per year, and a high user is about 10-11 megawatt hours per year. We live in Scotland. It's colder in Scotland. This is a bigger problem in Scotland. It's a bigger cost burden for people in Scotland. So all of these folks, there is council housing in here, there are large private properties in there. This is, I should highlight, we're very much considering looking at Kinross and Milnathort, but at the time that this graph was plotted, it's only Kinross data. It also does not include the high street because I was trying to separate out commercial properties from domestic properties, which is very difficult along the high street. But I think the messages will be very similar. There are very different types of property, and we need to make sure that any plausible district heating system would be able to cope with the different the different types of architecture. Taking this analysis and putting it into an economic model that we've been developing, the initial signs are consistent with Copenhagen and London and the experience very much on the continent where district heating systems are commonplace. This should economically work at the first pass in terms of delivering heat. That's separate, and we have yet to spend more time on how do we actually extract the heat from the loch, and can we obviously get the permissions to do that. We have a good relationship with a company. We're getting support from Ramble, a Danish centered consultancy, large international company, who have a district heating group in Edinburgh and also have a I've done lots of reports working with the Scottish Government, so that they've been behind many of the reports and schemes that the Scottish Government are looking at. We're getting help from them through workshops to take the information that we've got and look forward at how we take that to the next step. At the moment, we are very exploratory. Could we go to the next slide, please? We're trying to describe what the opportunities are and very much thinking towards procuring a feasibility study, a credible, commercially done feasibility study, in order to plan the next level down, what would be plausible and achievable in its expectations for the kind of return. To do that, we need to find the right partner. Ramble would be one of the possibilities. We need to be able to describe an appropriate brief for them, and make sure that key stakeholders are engaged in the questions that we're asking. At the moment, we're going up the learning curve so that we can ask good questions and understand the responses. And we obviously need also to secure funding to enable that to happen as a detailed planning stage. So that's all I would like to say at the moment, but I would be very happy to have any questions that you have, or indeed if you know of people who might be able to help, or you can see ways to help. We need to, if this is going to deliver, convert from thinking about it into doing something about it.
Okay, thank you, David. Have we got any questions? Richard, I'm not sure if you've got a question there or not. There's a queue in my box. Was that for the previous?
I do what it was the previous one, but I'm happy to. I do have a question, but I'm happy to wait just now.
Okay, Douglas, I'll let you go first then. Douglas Fraser.
Hi, thanks, Willie, and thanks, David, for the presentation. I've got a number of concerns, which I'll maybe just quickly list out, and then we can maybe chat away about them. I would obviously be worried about the effect on the loch and the climate in the loch, but that's something that's on your radar by the sounds of it. I'd be concerned about the suitability of the existing heating systems in properties as to whether they're adaptable to the type of lower grade of heating source that you might be looking at. Normally, a district heating system would circulate the distribution of hot water using medium temperature hot water rather than low temperature hot water, which is currently what heating systems work on. Low temperature hot water circulates at about 85 degrees C. I don't know what sort of temperatures you would be circulating heating water at and whether that would be suitable. I'm worried about the funding of this and where the money is going to come from, and would that impact on other needy groups that are looking for funding for other projects, as this is obviously going to be a very expensive exercise. Is there a possibility that it might detract from other needy groups? And probably the last thing is ongoing maintenance. I've had experience of working on district heating systems, and generally it's been to rip them out and replace them with individual heating systems because of the high cost of maintaining them, which has become unsustainable. So that's some of my initial comments and observations.
Right, thanks, Douglas. I'll hand over to David to see if he can give you answers to the questions.
On the loch front, I've got 4 headings here to deal with as quickly as I can. On the loch front, one of the arguments that got us thinking about using the loch was discussion with Linda May and the algal problem. There's real challenges with the amount of phosphorus getting into the loch. They're aggravated by the rising temperatures in the loch. One of the things that's interesting, and we don't know definitive answers, but there's an obvious question whether if you take a useful amount of heat out of the loch, that is actually something that might be beneficial for the ecosystems. We've been asking around trying to find whether there are any really good examples of large static bodies of water being used for this kind of system, whether there's things that we can leverage. Actually, there are not that many which are well described. So this is a newer thing to work on. What we're trying to do at the moment is to understand what happens to the temperature profile within, build a thermal model of the loch and see what happens as that is changed. Obviously, there's two parts to the loch impact. One is the things that you put in it, and you need to make sure that they are not polluting the loch. But then there's the question of the heat that you take out. Jamie Montgomery's response was that it might influence the fishing competitions, because the fish would very much like the cold water around the extraction points. But that's something where we need to get into better dialogue with the Nature Scotland and with leveraging the experience of other people who have done similar kind of things elsewhere. On the lower grade heating topic, there's a very interesting paper from the the Danish experience I've been reading, where they found that they've been looking at a large section of their housing stock precisely with this question in mind of, with the age of the stock, up to 100-year-old housing, can you put low temperature heating into that? What they've found in broad terms is that much of the heating is, much of the housing stock is now over-spec'd with radiators, because the radiators fitted tend to be the next size up, because the house is designed with radiators for -12, whereas degrees centigrade, where most of the time it's nothing like that. And then the third element was that any insulation improvements actually again over specify the heating performance within the house. And any improvements reduce the losses and make the heating more effective. So they found on that study that 80% in their experience of older type houses can actually be adapted straightforwardly. Now, I don't know what that would be in Kinross. We'd need to look more closely at that, but that at least says it is worth looking in that spec. As a data point of one, I'm currently running my house, which is a early 80s, late 70s house, with just below 50 degrees in this cold weather heating from the boiler, and it's working fine. Funding sources, that's a challenge. I suspect if we are going either for the protect the loch argument, or indeed a substantial green funding to decarbonise, there may well be other sources of funding available that do not cannibalise other local projects that aren't oriented in that way. We can probably open up routes to other funding. On the topic of ongoing maintenance, the Danish experience is counter to what you described. I know there are older heating systems here that are very long in the tooth, also Eastern European ones if the maintenance is not adequate. then they lose efficacy over time. But with the technology improvements and with an appropriate organisation planning to do it effectively, I'm sure that's a manageable problem.
Okay, thanks, David. I've now got a question from Douglas. Are you quite happy with that response?
Yeah, fine. Thanks for that. Yeah, I appreciate your comments. I've nothing else to add to that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Cuthbert has got a question. Then I'll move on to Councillor Waters.
Yeah, this is kind of a question for officers as well as David. I was down at the in Glenrothes next to the River Leven, and it was coming out green. The water was a bright green colour, and it's quite clear that the loch has been really affected by blue-green algae. My thinking here is that, from what you said, if you put something that reduces the temperature of the loch, it might actually help in terms of reducing the amount of blue-green algae, etc. I think that would then achieve one of the objectives of the council, which is to protect the loch. The loch is an area of special protection and so on. And I'm just wondering, and first of all, David, whether he'd be willing to work with officers in terms of looking at this question of, funding, what boxes it ticks, if you like, and also to officers to see if officers can put somebody forward to work with you to see if we can actually get a combined work with the local community, with the council, moving forward with this project to see if we can get something done and to identify all the possibilities of what can be done. So it's both a question for David and for officers.
Okay, thank you. Right, I'll go to the officers first. Is there anyone able to answer Councillor Cuthbert's question? Either my screen's not working or there's silence.
Councillor Robertson,
Yes.
I'm sure we can find somebody in the council's green space team, at least have a conversation to understand what's involved and the resource implications. But I can certainly take it away if I can have some contact details around potentially looking at that as an option.
Mr. Butterworth, my understanding is that the council did some preliminary work to use the River Tay as for a district heating system a number of years ago, but it wasn't proceeded with. Are you aware of that?
Unfortunately, I think that predates myself, so I wasn't aware of that. No,
but
sorry.
There may be somebody still within the council who's got experience of that. You can maybe tap into.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
David
Cairns, do you want to comment as well now?
Well, I would be delighted, and I'm sure I can speak on behalf of the other team members. We'd be delighted to engage in further discussion, and appreciate your support in doing that. On the topic of the blue algae, obviously it's phosphorus and temperature that are aggravating that, but clearly the amount of waste that is coming through into the loch is a significant problem at the moment. There is potential to look towards leveraging heat from the wastewater processing locations. If you've got the right kind of network, we can go looking at different sources and help with the evolution, perhaps solve some other problems in that area too.
Okay, thank you. Now I'm going to move on to Councillor Waters and then Malcolm Thompson.
Just
oh, wait a minute, Catherine's come in. Catherine, do you want to comment on the River Tay? Catherine Farmer.
Hi there. Yes, it was in 2017. I actually just came in at the sort of end of the project when I think a lot of the groundwork had been done, and I have no expertise on heat pumps or anything like that. I'm just a estates surveyor, so I was kind of looking at the evaluation side of it along with somebody who knew a little bit more about it. And at the time, the idea was to take it down through the North Muirton housing scheme and put it in there. But it was just at the time, that seems strange now, the gas prices had dropped, and were relatively cheap. And also it turned out that a lot of the North Muirton housing was private. It had a lot of it being sold off. So it would have been difficult to enforce people. You couldn't have enforced people to choose it. And it would have involved a huge amount of digging. I think possibly one of the conclusions is that it's very, very difficult to retrofit, because as I think you were pointing out earlier, you need great big heater. Well, you need much bigger radiators at a lower temperature, which is difficult obviously to put into existing houses, and a slightly tricky thing for people to accept if they don't know about it. So, but it definitely has potential, I think, in modern builds, new builds.
Okay, thanks very much indeed for that, Catherine. That's helpful. It shows that the experience, there is experience within the council on this type of scheme. Councillor Waters, Richard Waters now, please.
Thank you, convener. Thanks, David, for your presentation. Mine's is going to be slightly along the lines of seeing if officers can add some extra information here as well. One of the main parts on the council's climate change strategy and action plan is district heat systems, and to have a look and progress how we can do that. That is supposed to kind of sit next to or within the local heat and energy efficiency strategy, which is a Scottish Government action on which covers a lot of issues that David has raised over the fabric first approach, hitting our net zero targets by 2045, dealing with fuel poverty and stuff like that. So it's all within it. We have recently just put an officer has just been put into place. I don't think I'm wrong on that, but correct me if I am, officers. And it was just to see if there's an officer there, just to answer the question that from a council perspective, we have to look at that, and we're in the process of starting that strategy off. Again, I believe the deadline for that's the end of next year, end of 2023, and it's just to ask. And I also believe that it's supposed to involve community engagement as well. But given it's early days and an officer's just put in place, I'm just wondering if somebody there is able to give a rough update just to confirm that the council will be looking at that, and there is the potential to getting community to work with David and within the group and look at the potential of doing a district heat system in Kinross using whatever source, whether it's the lock or the sewerage system or water treatment systems or anything else that's identified during the feasibility study. I'm not sure if there is somebody available that can add.
Well, I noticed that I'm pleased to see that Ben Wilson has got an answer for us. Ben, can you help?
Thank you, Councillor. Only a partial answer. Yes, the LHEs, as the officers have seemed to be starting referring to it with an acronym, but the local heat energy efficiency strategy legislation and the programme, it's still early days. We are putting together a brief for technical consultancy services, which will go out in potentially, I think, 3 lots. That's been finalised at the moment to move. I don't actually have the timescales available, but it's live. We were looking at it earlier this week. I'm not sure if the person is in post yet or not, but it's something which you need quite a bit of staff resource. Still early days, but I think that the thinking behind the legislation is to introduce a statutory requirement so local authorities have got something which can provide a context and a framework for proposals such as this, and proposals from private sector and the council's own activities or partners, affordable housing developments and so on. So I'm not sure if that's answered your full question, but we're very much moving forward in LHEs, and I would think that community development trusts, bringing forward community-owned renewable energy and heat networks are exactly the kind of thing that having local heat energy efficiency strategies are intended to both support and encourage. A lot of technical challenges, and it's a it's a fast-moving area with great potential, but there'll be a lot of learning to be done in the process as well.
Okay, thanks so much for that. Are you happy with that response, Richard?
That's great, thank you, and I'm sure as elected members we'll all ensure that there is a community element to that, and David, and that the scheme is included.
Good. I don't. Perhaps some of you don't know, but Councillor Waters is now convener of the Council's Climate Emergency Committee, so he's in an ideal position to help David and his team to move forward. David Cairns and his team to move this forward, hopefully. I've got a final question from Malcolm Thompson. Malcolm.
Thanks, Willie. It was just, well, mainly echo most of the comments. I think the intention is very admirable, but with my job, I come across this all the time, and I think the fabric first approach should be advanced first and then renewables second. I realise the renewables route is all nice and shiny and lovely, whereas the less sexy approach of actually insulating houses, so the heat factor is lessened. Instead of pumping more heat in, you want to use less heat in each house. I'm sure David would agree. So that was just a point to make, that it should be a holistic approach and not just chase the shiny option.
Okay, thanks for that, Malcolm. I think David understands that from listening to his presentation, but do you want to comment, David?
Absolutely, fabric first. There is huge potential, but folks need help to do that, and so having a collective programme to make a difference getting the community engagement to do that might leverage more than just letting people get on with it when they can. I'd also make the point that community engagement, I think, is a hugely important part. We did take a little gazebo at the summer market here in Kinross and talked to loads of folk about the basic premise here, and there is very strong recognition of the importance of doing it and enthusiasm to engage. That's not the same as signing a check to commit to take it, but there's a lot of people who A, are struggling with heating costs, but B, also treasure the loch and want to do something helpful for our local ecosystems. So it could be that joining the two is a good thing to do. We've got public support for it.
Okay, thanks so much indeed. As someone who lives in an old house, trying to insulate it is not easy, but we're certainly doing our best to try and do that, especially with the cost of energy. David Cairns, can I thank you very much indeed for all your time and your efforts on this. I personally hope it will come to fruition and we can achieve this. Surely it's the best solution in the long term, and I think it has to be done in partnership with, as Malcolm Thompson says, as we move along, trying to make our houses more efficient and like a twin track approach. And with the help, as I said, from Councillor Waters in his new position, I'm sure we can take full advantage of the work that you and your team are doing. So thanks very much indeed for all your help.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Now, I'd like to move on. We've got paper 7, and I'll pass back again to Councillor Cuthbert.
Thank you, Convener. Yeah, this report is about the supply and demand for serviced employment landing in the Kinross-shire area. Just to give a bit of background to the report, this was asked for by the four local members. We're basically very conscious that the population of Kinross-shire has grown very rapidly. My own figures are indicating roughly 22% increase in population over the last 10 years. And we're also very conscious that there's no immediately available employment land. So we asked for this report to come forward. We've got Catherine Farmer and Ben Wilson. Ben Wilson is here from Forward Planning. and Catherine Farmer is part of the estates team. So I don't know if you guys want to say anything or whether you just want to go straight to questions. If you could possibly let me know.
I'm here in a very general sense. So in terms of the actual report, Councillor, I'm assuming that Catherine will be more direct involved. I'm aware of the preparation of the report, but not the detail. But I'm able to provide advice on the planning policy context generally.
Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, I'm here for questions if everybody's had a look at the report.
Okay, thank you. I mean, in principle, I think one of the things we'd be interested in is the various community councils considering whether there's a need for employment land in their areas, and possibly coming forward with that. I think, Ben, I'm correct in saying that the local development plan's at an early phase, but it's ready to start taking sort of comments, is it, from communities that might come forward with stuff?
So this is Local Development Plan 3. So the current Local Development Plan,
yeah,
LDP2, was adopted in 2019, and it does set out and identify employment land, including as yet to be developed land within Kinross-shire. As is stated in the report, we have commissioned work from Rydens, looking at employment land and employment needs generally, and subdivided by different areas, including Kinross-shire. And that's one of the key inputs to the preparation of the next local development plan, which will take a number of years and is not expected to be adopted until by 2027. If it can happen sooner, then great, but that's the long target, 2027. As part of that process of preparing the LDP, we've started what we've branded the Big Place conversation, which will is intended to get information from communities in general terms using a tool called the Place Standard, and including people's views about not just about housing and services for residents, but just the place as a whole, which includes employment provision. That's just getting underway. There will in due course be information about when we're focusing on the Kinross-shire area. We're starting in Perth City in the first months of 2023, partly because it's winter, it's better to arrange in-person engagement events in winter in places that are not reliant on winter rural travel for attendees. So we've got a structured approach to taking input. There will be opportunities as the LDP3 project proceeds for more formal input, but what I would say is a Big Place conversation will be a way to provide input, but we're all for communities, but we're also aware in terms of this committee and the focus on this employment land, what this committee's views are on the report that's before you this evening. It's something we'll be taking cognizance of as well. So I hope that answers your question, Councillor.
I think it does, yes. Councillor Robertson, you've got a question.
Yes, in a previous life, I lived in England for a while, and I used to do quite a lot of travelling when I was there. And then I always was amazed. You go to tiny villages, and they would have a small commercial area, just a tiny industrial estate. And I know there was moves to try and provide Crooked Devon with a small parcel of employment land. I think for LDP, was it 1 or 2, and it was never actually proceeded with. Ben, can I ask you what the council's policy is with regarding providing employment opportunities in small places like Crooked Devon and Glenfarg, for example, to allow people to actually work locally, provide employment land locally without having to travel?
We've got so there's flexibility. There's flexibility in the planning system, and there's flexibility in the within plan policies for very small scale employment use to come forward. In terms of identifying sites, that's done through the plan itself. So in terms of allocating land and drawing the settlement boundary, and there was a question earlier about settlement definition, and that is something which is defined in local development plans, and well over 100 settlements across Perth and Kinross, and there's a map showing what
where does the settlement stop and where does it start? So that is something that's driven through the LDP, so that things like traffic and transport impacts can be considered through the plan, in broad terms, through the plan preparation process. I'm afraid I'm not familiar with the particular history of plan preparation for Crook of Devon, although there'll be people in the LDP team that will have either direct knowledge or be able to source it from the project files. But there is also desire to make sure that land is allocated where it can be taken up and where it's commercially viable to take it up. And that's an issue across many locations, not just Perth and Kinross, that you can allocate it, but it won't necessarily be commercially viable to construct the business units and let them at a rate that pays off the cost of construction. And that's one of the things that the full riding study has given us sort of market perspective on, because there is a risk of allocating land and sitting there for a long time, as has been the case with some sites that are still allocated without uptake. And there's both an opportunity cost to that, could the land be used for something else, and there might also be an environmental impact, because then you're taking it out of greenfield use, allocating it for development, and maybe it's not needed for that in the long run.
Thank you. Thanks for that. Can I just say that from experience, I know that landowners who have actually got land that have been allocated for commercial purposes often won't sell it for commercial purposes, hoping that in the long run they'll get housing on it. So that's another issue. But thanks, Vice Convener.
No problem. Is there anyone else with any questions, or would you like to make any comments in terms of what's before you? No, I don't see anything. My only comment myself is that I have 4 children and they were all brought up in Kinross, and 3 are now living in England. 1 is living in Edinburgh. There's nobody living locally. And from my perspective, I think it's very important that we focus on trying to find employment sites and employment locally. It's a very important thing to me. I see that Sarah Bruce Jones has got a question. Do you want to come forward?
Thank you. The report's great. I'm all in favour in place. However, I noted it's
you're breaking up a bit, Sarah. Could you repeat?
It's important to look at the other outlying villages like Crook of Devon, Glenfarg, Cleash, Scotland Well. They're all needing it, and the need for some joined up thinking, because there is no public transport. I know we've got the 202, but the whole thing about having employment land, but then no way of, if it's all concentrated in Milner, Thornton, Kinross, fantastic, but no one who lives in the outlying villages can actually get to work at there. So we do need to look at the outlying villages.
Thank you, Sarah. I think that's a very well made point, and I think hopefully Ben will be able to take that forward into the plan. Do we have any other questions or comments? Do you want to reply, Ben?
If that's okay. Yep. So alongside the Local Development Plan 3 project, we've got our local housing strategy, which is largely prepared and will be come to the relevant committee for Perth and Kinross at the start of 2023, and that will inform where we provide homes for where people live, or rather the amounts where will be provided by LDP3. And the third pillar of these 3 strategies is the mobility strategy, which is the local transport strategy for all Perth and Kinross, not just the city, but the entirety of Perth and Kinross, including Kinross-shire. And I think that there's a big opportunity to achieve an aligned land use strategy, including employment land allocations, including in Kinross-shire, in LDP3, and the transport strategy, including where's public transport provision, where public transport services now, where might they commercially or with some kind of support be viable in future, and things like mobility and demand. And that's why my earlier point about thinking about land allocation being done in a strategic way through plan preparation is important, so precisely so it can be joined up about how people can get from where they live to where they work or access services. So that it is a very good point, and it's a key reason why we're proceeding with these 3 strategies together on housing, transport and
land use and how those all things are joined up together. But you would expect a planner to say that it's important to have a plan.
Yep, I would expect a planner to say that, or at least a forward planner. Does anyone else have any comments or questions? So we're quite happy to note the paper. So I'll hand back to Councillor Robertson.
Thank you for that. The last paper we've got, paper 8, is really just for noting. It's the let you know that there was 2 different groups of money allocated. One to the Broome Road and Broome Court residents, and another one was to, I think it was £1,000. No, for light up Kinross. Is everyone happy with that? Okay. Well, that concludes the business of today's meeting. This is my last time of convening it, and the convenership will be passing on to Councillor Cuthbert, and to the vice convenership to Councillor Richard Waters, who will be taking the next meeting, which I think is in early February. So I hope to see you all before then, but if I don't, I hope you have a very good Christmas. I want to thank you all for attending this afternoon's meeting, and hopefully we'll make progress on the issues that we've discussed. So thank you for your contributions. Have a great night.